All right, well, welcome back to Exodus. We are going to be this morning in Exodus 7 and in verse 8, if you'd like to turn there and get ready. And don't worry, Aaron, our worship leader, will be back in a few weeks. You won't have to put up with me too much longer. Keep praying for him. Keep praying for Louisa. She's got some health stuff and a big surgery coming up. Pray for them. If you've been with us, there's been a question that's been hanging over this section of the book of Exodus. It's not Israel's question. It's not Moses or Aaron's question. It's Pharaoh's question. And Pastor Rob, if you were here a few weeks ago, led us through what that question is. Do you remember it? Back in chapter 5 of Exodus, when Moses first stood before Pharaoh, he looked at him and Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should worship him? Who is the Lord that I should worship him?" At first glance, a question like that seems a little promising, I think. It seems like, oh, that's a good question. Let me explain. But do you remember Pilate's question at Jesus' trial? What is truth, he asked. And then he turned and walked out of the room. He didn't want an answer. He was making a point. The question really was a statement. It's the same here. We do things like this all the time, even today. Have you ever had someone say to you, "Do you really think that's a good idea?" Have you had someone say that? Can I translate what that means for you? That means that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard. That's not really a question, it's a statement. Were you born in a barn? It's not a question. Shut the door. Kids, have your parents ever said, "How many times have I told you?" Don't give them a number. That's not what they're after. You know what I'm saying, Henry? Guys, a few days ago, guys, you'll appreciate this. I guess it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I get a text from my wife, my lovely, amazing wife, Naomi, and the only message in the text is, "Do you know what day it is?" Oh, no. I didn't know what day it was, and I felt that panic because I thought this is not a question. This is a statement. I've done something really wrong. And to be honest, I don't remember what the day was, which is probably part of the reason I get myself into such predicaments. But there are all kinds of questions like this. When Pharaoh says, "Who is the Lord that I should worship him?" he is not asking for a theology lesson. He doesn't care. You remember the Philippian jailer, he said, "What must I do to be saved?" The Ethiopian eunuch said, "What's preventing me from being baptized?" Mary, when the angel came down, said, How is this going to happen?" Those are all genuine questions, but this is not Pharaoh's question. Pharaoh's question is a statement, and it reveals that he does not recognize whoever this God of Moses is. He doesn't care about him. It wasn't curiosity, it was contempt. I don't know him, I don't recognize him, I certainly don't answer to him. Your God is nothing. This is what Pharaoh's opinion was. This is what his position was. Why would I ever consider, even for a moment, doing something your God says? In a way, the whole rest of the Exodus story is God answering Pharaoh's question, even though Pharaoh's question, he didn't really want an answer to it. All of the rest of what we're going to see throughout these plagues and things that we're getting into this week is God's answer to the question, who is this Lord? He lays out his power, but it's not just a display of power throughout these plagues. He doesn't just send them to punish those who oppose him, but he's laying out very clearly, this is who I am. These plagues, as we get going, they're not only disasters, they are revelations. They reveal God and who he is and what power he has. They should reveal to Egypt that everything that they are placing their trust in is bankrupt. It's worthless, it's hollow, it's empty. I wonder if Pharaoh had known where this question would have led him if he would have asked it in the first place. Let's begin and read this morning. We got a lengthy section to read, but we'll try to be efficient as we go through this morning. Exodus 7 and verse 8. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "When the Pharaoh says to you, 'Perform a miracle,' then say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and throw it down before Pharaoh, and it will become a snake.' So Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as the Lord commanded. Aaron threw his staff down in front of Pharaoh. and his officials, and it became a snake. Pharaoh then summoned wise men and sorcerers, and the Egyptian magicians also did the same things by their secret arts. Each one of them threw down his staff, and it became a snake. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staffs. Yet Pharaoh's heart became hard, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said. Verse 14, then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh's heart is unyielding. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he goes out to the river. Confront him on the bank of the Nile and take in your hand the staff that was changed into a snake. Then say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has sent me to say to you, let my people go so that they may worship me in the wilderness. But until now you have not listened. This is what the Lord says. By this you will know that I am the Lord. With the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water of the Nile, and it will be changed into blood. The fish in the Nile will die, the river will stink, the Egyptians will not be able to drink its water. The Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over the streams and canals, over the ponds and all the reservoirs, and they will turn to blood. Blood will be everywhere in Egypt, even in vessels of wood and stone. Moses and Aaron did just as the Lord had commanded. He raised his staff in the presence of Pharaoh and his officials and struck the water of the Nile, and all the water was changed into blood. The fish in the Nile died. The river smelled so bad that the Egyptians could not drink its water. Blood was everywhere in Egypt. But the Egyptian magicians did their same things by their secret arts. And the Pharaoh's heart became hard. He would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. Instead, he turned and went into his palace and did not even take this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile to get drinking water because they could not drink the water of the river. Verse 25, 7 days passed after the Lord struck the Nile. Then the Lord said to Moses, go to Pharaoh and say to him, this is what the Lord says, let my people go so that they may worship me. If you refuse to let them go, I will send a plague of frogs on your whole country. The Nile will teem with frogs. They will come up into your palace and your bedroom and onto your bed, into the houses of your officials and on your people and into your ovens and kneading troughs. The frogs will come up on you and your people and all your officials. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the streams and canals and ponds and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land. But the magicians did the same things by their secret arts. They also made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, pray to the Lord to take the frogs away from me and my people. I will let your people go to offer sacrifices to the Lord. Moses said to Pharaoh, I leave to you the honor of setting the time for me to pray for you and your officials and your people, that you and your houses may be rid of the frogs, except for those that remain in the Nile. Tomorrow, Pharaoh said. Moses replied, it will be as you say, so that you may know there is no one like the Lord our God. The frogs will leave you and your houses, your officials and your people. They will remain only in the Nile. After Moses and Aaron left Pharaoh, Moses cried out to the Lord about the frogs he had brought on Pharaoh, and the Lord did what Moses asked. The frogs died in the houses, in the courtyards, and in the fields. They were piled into heaps, and the land reeked of them. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he hardened his heart and would not listen to Moses and Aaron, just as the Lord had said. This is a big passage. There's so much going on here. But the first thing that we're going to see is that God confronts false confidence. That's the first thing that he does with the Pharaoh. The confrontation begins here in chapter 7 and verse 8. And it's almost quiet. There's no plague. There's no panic. In fact, it's just, some people have called this section, not the 10 plagues, but the 11 signs or the 11 miracles, because there are 11, and the rest of the 10 after this aren't all necessarily plagues in the strictest sense. It's just what we've come to call them. We just have here two old men standing before the most powerful ruler on earth. Imagine the scene, if you will. Throw up that first picture if you don't care. Just imagine the scene, what it must have looked like with just two old shepherds standing in the midst of all this grandeur and splendor and majesty, massive stone columns and walls painted with all of the victories that the Pharaoh had completed in the past. There would have been officials lining the hall and warriors and priests and advisors and commanders. Every symbol in this room of the palace would have proclaimed the same message. Egypt is untouchable. Egypt's power is untouchable. Egypt's gods are untouchable. The Pharaoh himself is untouchable. He is a God on earth. And two shepherds step forward. They must seem so out of place. So out of place. Right? Hello? Is anybody? I'm sorry. They must seem so out of place here. But then the story continues. One of them, Aaron, steps forward with a staff in his hand and he throws it on the ground and it becomes this snake. It's insane, isn't it? For a brief moment, I imagine the room must have gone silent as people watched on. And I can just imagine maybe the Pharaoh sitting there for a moment and then a smile crossing his face. He's seen impressive things before. In fact, he has people who work for him. They're on his payroll. They do all kinds of interesting stuff like this. He summons his own magicians, and remarkably, they throw down their staves and they become snakes as well. Moses never explains how. It's one of these questions that he doesn't care to answer for us. He just wants us to know. We know that Moses and Aaron are performing all of these miracles and signs and wonders by the power of God, but from where do the Egyptian magicians get their power? Or is it just trickery? We don't know. It's not the last time that we will see the magicians show up in the story, but certainly they're going to not be able to keep up pretty soon with what is going on. The most important part is not what they do or even how they have the power to do it, but what happens next. Aaron's serpent swallows up every other serpent in the room. It's such a cool image because you think about it in a sense, before any of the big plagues begin, before any of the stuff that you know is about to come starts to unfold, God here kind of works everything out in miniature. He shows you what it's going to look like on the grander scale. All of Egypt's gods will be pitted against the God of Israel. And from even this first scene, there should be no uncertainty about what the outcome will be. It's all laid out here. And Pharaoh here in this passage is given his first opportunity. Now he could stop here, right? He could say, okay, hold on. He could at least be like curious and wonder, maybe there is something to this, but he doesn't do that. Several times God says either that God kind of predicts that he's going to harden his heart. Sometimes God says, I'm going to harden his heart. Sometimes God talks about the Pharaoh hardening his own heart. Let's talk about this for a minute. This is one of the big themes here in this section of Exodus. I'd like to propose that when we think about a hard heart, we think about something kind of specific, or at least I do. If I think about a hard heart, I think almost entirely about stubbornness. And the Pharaoh was definitely stubborn. He was definitely stubborn, and in the end, his pride would lead to his destruction. But the word here in Hebrew is a very interesting word because it's very versatile. Even though the Pharaoh is portrayed as unmoving and stubborn and callous and having this impenetrable will, the word is versatile. More strictly, this word means, you probably have heard this before, but this word means to be heavy. It means to be weighty. It is the same root word that is used all throughout the Old Testament for the glory of God. His weightiness, his importance, his majesty. This is the same root word, but it's talking about Pharaoh and his heart. This is why interpretation is so interesting and fun to do. It's why that I don't have a specific translation that I say this is the only one I use and none others, because these things are a little bit more complex than that. This is the same root word as is used for God's glory, but to imagine that Pharaoh has glory that is anything like God's glory upends the message, doesn't it? So it's translated here for us as hard heart, but what it really means, and it means all kinds of things. It's a big word, but what it means as specifically as possible is a heavy heart. Now that means something, I think, to us too, but don't let your modern mind pull you away from what is going on here. In the religion of ancient Egypt, there was, of course, you probably know, an immense focus on the afterlife. Virtually everything they did in this life had something to do with the life to come. The Egyptians believed, of course, in many gods. And they believed that when a person passed away, they would go into this kind of courtroom setting. And all of the Egyptian gods would be in this council before them. And Osiris, I don't know a ton about Osiris, but he would head up the charge and he would be the one there. And these people who had passed away would have to go through everything they could think of one by one, and they would have to say, I have never lied. I have never stolen. I have never cheated. I have never been rebellious towards people over me. All the things that they weren't, as Egyptians, supposed to do, they had to one by one say, I haven't done any of this stuff. And in the center of this courtroom, in their thinking, was a scale. And on one side of the scale was a feather. And on the other side was the heart of the person who had passed away. And if they were found to have done anything wrong, then more weight was added to the scale on the heart side. Their heart became heavier and heavier. And if in the end their heart outweighed that feather, Egyptians believed they could never enter into the afterlife. Do you see why God might be using the word heavy? Scale was important. This was the afterline. The word heavy is used here purposefully because the Pharaoh is not only stubborn, the Pharaoh is doomed. The Egyptians were said to judge a soul after it had died, but the Pharaoh is being judged now while he's alive and by a God who is more powerful than all of those other gods put together. Every plague will become more weight put on to his heart, and the scales get further and further and further. He's doomed. He's hopeless. This God is the only hope that he has. And instead of his heart becoming lighter through repentance and through doing what God is asking, it just becomes heavier and heavier and heavier until finally the open judgment comes when the plagues officially begin. And there is no pantheon of Egyptian gods that come to run and save the Pharaoh. All those gods are not only impotent, powerless, but they're imaginary. They can't do anything. There is one true God who will have his way. And the story moves us out to the Nile. Now slow down here a minute, because when this stuff, you know what's going on here. You've heard this over and over since you were in Sunday school as a little child. So let's not rush through it. London was built on the Thames. Rome was built on the Tiber. Budapest on the Danube, and so many others. Paris on the Seine. New Orleans is on the Mississippi, I think. Is that right? Sounds right. You understand why this is here. You understand why all these large cities are built on rivers, because they need them. There's an obvious reason that the Nile is so important to the Egyptians. It's Egypt's confidence. It was not just a part of their life, it was their entire life. It was everything to them. It watered their fields, it fed their families, it fueled their economy, it defined their calendar. It was their highway to the rest of the world. It was their main route of trade. Their literature praised it, their religion celebrated it. It was everything to them until one morning it wasn't. Now, you have to kind of put yourself into the shoes of the people who would have been impacted by something like this. For those of you who might have been around the world before, maybe you've been to some of those places where it's normal to go and fetch water every day for your family. Well, that's what it would have been like in ancient Egypt. Imagine with me, if you will, a mother getting up before dawn and making the long journey toward the river to get the water that her family needs and her animals need, and she needs to cook and clean and everything that she needs. for the day. She has to go and get the water and carry it back home with her. And I imagine it must be a little bit like our drive to work in the morning sometimes, where you just do it so often. I don't think about what directions to take to come here in the morning, do you? My mind is just wandering. I'm not thinking about anything, and somehow then I just end up here. It must have been the same to her. She's walking along toward the Nile, and a bit confused maybe, she thinks, something is different this morning. There are a lot more people out on this shore of this river, this bank of this river, than normally. What is going on? Maybe she's confused as she's looking around and just kneels down and dips that jug in the water to pull it up, only then to realize it's red. She starts kind of snapping out of that brain fog, that early morning ride to work. She snaps out of it and she starts to realize, doesn't she, that the water is filled with dead fish. And all the people are gathered around in kind of a panic. What are we going to do? Can you show that second picture if you would? Just imagine what it must be like if everything that you need to live is in an instant taken away from you. Death instead of life. Within a couple hours, certainly everyone in the whole country, even without all the modern conveniences and technology that we have, everyone in the country would have been talking. Everyone in the country would have been wondering what in the world is going on. God has a way, doesn't he, of flipping everything on its head. Do you remember little baby Moses? Just a few chapters back when we went through that, the Pharaoh wanted to use the Nile to kill the people of God. And what did God do? He used it to save Moses. And now here we see that the Nile would have meant life to everyone in Egypt, and God turns it to death. He removes all the life from it. It shows that God's power is unrivaled. It shows where life truly comes from and who truly holds sway over it. The river has never belonged to Egypt. The river has always belonged to God. Now, this is an amazing first sign from God, but those magicians, again, they can do interesting stuff too. The Pharaoh remains unmoved because they just make some water turn red too. And so the next plague comes. And that picks up in chapter 8 again. We won't read it again. It's long. You can read it as much as you want when you go home. But it's frogs. Terrifying, isn't it? Frogs. It reminds me of the day the squirrel went berserk. Have you ever, anybody? If you get that reference, we're going to be good friends, I promise. But it's just like frogs, what? Frogs don't typically strike fear into the hearts of anyone, do they? I mean, God, why not send lions? Why not send bears? Why not send Komodo dragons? You're God, why not send velociraptors in there? Why frogs? It doesn't sound scary at all. Frogs aren't that big a deal. You'd have to be a crazy person to be scared of a frog, wouldn't you? Maybe. But maybe it's not terror that God is after here. Did you know, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the weeks to come, but did you know that one of the Egyptian gods was the frog god? You might have seen them in Egyptian pictures and stuff before. It's the body of a person and the head of a frog, and this was the god of childbirth and new life and all kinds of stuff. It was sacred. The frog itself, a frog itself, sacred to the Egyptians. You can make all kinds of things sacred in your life that ought not be. Frogs aren't bad in and of themselves, are they? They're probably really good for the ecosystem or something. I'm not a scientist, but they're not bad. But all kinds of things that are not bad can become idols to us. They can become things that we elevate to the level of sacredness, and we ought not to. You have to picture the frogs, I think. At least I do, to try and understand what people would have been feeling. Can you throw up that next picture? Is there one with frogs? Frogs everywhere. Ooh, that's what I'm talking about. Terrible. Ooh, and they're everywhere. They're in bedrooms and in kitchens and in the food and in the bread bowls and down in the ovens that they've dug in the floor and in their beds. The text almost becomes repetitive because Moses just wants us to feel they're inescapable. They're everywhere. They're covering everything. That is, by the way, how God often exposes our idols. Think about this. Sometimes God doesn't just destroy your idols. Sometimes he lets them become too much. They couldn't escape the frogs. They couldn't get away from them. They closed the door. Somehow they were already inside. They were sweeping the floor, and somehow more are just springing up everywhere. And again, God has flipped the story on its head. He's flipped the values of the Egyptians on their head. Egypt associated frogs with fertility and with life and with birth, and now what symbolized blessing is misery. Sometimes God exposes idols not by taking them away or by destroying them, but by letting them become unbearable to you. By giving you a little taste of what worshiping them actually leads you to. They all become overwhelming. Think about that. What things have you made sacred in your life? What things have become idols to you? Is it success? Is it finances? Is it esteem? Is it money or comfort or relationships or control? What is it that you are really after that you've made sacred? Because no matter what it is, that thing will become overwhelming to you long before it becomes satisfying to you. You're going to be overwhelmed by all of your idols long before. And probably they won't ever satisfy you. Finally, Pharaoh calls for Moses here. And I feel like the story here is just shouting things that it doesn't even say. That doesn't make sense in your mind yet, but maybe it will in a minute. Up to this point, the magicians have been able to replicate these things, right? But replicating them, however they were doing it, wasn't helping. I mean, have you thought about that? I love this part so much. It was only making the predicament worse. Right? Oh, you can turn the water to blood and all red. Well, we can turn water red too. And then the water just gets more red and undrinkable and unusable. Oh, you can make frogs come up out of the water. Well, we can do that too. Well, congratulations. Now there's just more frogs that you don't want everywhere. It's an interesting little thought, isn't it? I'd have thought you guys would, do away with some of the things rather than just adding more to them. But this is so important. Why do you think, listen to this, why do you think that the Pharaoh didn't ask his magicians to undo the plagues? We never have any evidence that he asks them, hey, make the frogs go away. Pray to the Lord, the Pharaoh says. Listen so carefully to this. Pray to the Lord to take the frogs away. Again, that sounds promising because in it there's at least now a tacit acknowledgement. This God of the Israelites is truly powerful. The Pharaoh knows that this was not an accident. Now he knows that this God has the power to bring these things on. He must have the power to do away with them again. But look it over again. He never says, okay, I was wrong. He never says, I have sinned. He never says, okay, I will obey. I will honor this God. He doesn't want God. He wants relief. The Pharaoh doesn't want God. He wants relief. This is so important. So many people come into churches today and they're seeking relief from whatever they're struggling with out there in the world. And then having come here for a time and then finding that relief that they're after because of the kindness and friendships and support that a church offers, they will then leave the church having got what they needed without ever having gotten Christ. Relief and relationship are not the same thing. Relief and relationship are not the same thing. Pharaoh is willing to negotiate here to ease the discomfort, but he is unwilling to give up his throne. God answers the prayer. All the sacred frogs die. The land stinks. They're piled up. It's gross, right? But when relief comes, so does forgetfulness. Almost immediately. and Pharaoh hardens his heart once more. How often do you pray because you just want to feel God's presence? How often? How often do you pray because you genuinely want to feel God's presence or experience God's presence? How often do you pray simply because you want your circumstances changed? And how often do we all pray asking God to change our circumstances, and then our circumstances change, and what do? We go on about our life, forgetting everything about the God that we've been praying to, not imagining for a moment that He had anything to do with the change that has come. By now, there's a pattern that is beginning to emerge here in our story, and we're just about done. There's a warning at the beginning, then there's the sign, the miracle, the amazing thing from God. And He takes that which is sacred and makes it destructive. God relieves the effects, the destructiveness goes away, and then the renewed resistance comes. That's the pattern that we've been seeing over these few verses here. But something in this next little scene changes. Let's just read verses 16 through 19 of chapter 8 as we close out here this morning. And pay close attention. Exodus 8:16. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the ground, and throughout the land of Egypt the dust will become gnats." They did this, and when Aaron stretched out his hand with the staff and struck the dust of the ground, gnats came on people and animals. All the dust throughout the land of Egypt became gnats. But when the magicians tried to produce gnats by their secret arts, they could not. Since the gnats were on the people and animals everywhere, the magicians said to Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart was hard, and he would not listen. This time, there is no lead up to what's going on. There's no negotiation before. It's just, okay, Pharaoh's not listening. Let's move on. Let's do this. Did you show that picture? I saw something up there. Was there a picture of bugs up there? Did you see it? Nice, okay. There's no lead up to it. The magicians step forward and try to replicate. Aaron had struck the ground, and the very dust itself became animals, became these insects, these gnats, and these little flying things. The magicians had so far been able to match things, right? Their staffs could become snakes too somehow. They matched the blood, they matched the frogs. Surely they could do it this time, but they can't. And Moses says almost nothing about their failure, just that one little sentence. They could not. They could imitate, but they could not create. They could replicate certain signs in a way, but they could not give life. There is only one creator. There is only one person in all of existence that can do what is done here. And comes one of my favorite lines in the entire plague narrative. The magicians look at Pharaoh and they say quietly, This is real. This is the finger of God. You have to think about who's speaking there. It's not Moses. It's not Aaron. It's not an Israelite. It's the pagan court magicians whose entire living and livelihood depends on Egypt's religious system. And they see it. They don't doubt it. They don't understand it all. They don't become worshipers right away, but they begin to realize this is God. This is who this God is. And here's the tragedy that people close to Pharaoh are beginning to recognize. But he refuses. His heart remains fixed. His heart is getting heavier and heavier because sin always isolates. It always separates. It shrinks our world. And pride is one of the biggest sins of all. Pride has a way of convincing us that everyone else and everything else, everywhere else is mistaken. Because I'm right. Even when the evidence is right in front of us. No matter how high it begins to stack, we close our eyes and we shut our ears. and we dig in our heels and we put up the walls and we make our hearts harder and heavier. It's always tempting to view ourselves in Moses' shoes and think, well, would I have done? Would I have been obedient when God said something to me? Would I have done this? Would I have gone and been brave enough to stand before the Pharaoh? I think the Bible wants us to see ourselves in Pharaoh's shoes. The question might be, why didn't Pharaoh listen? But the question for us here this morning is, why are we so much like Pharaoh? Why don't we listen? Pharaoh's problem by this point is not a lack of evidence, right? And it's definitely not going to be a lack of evidence soon, next week. But Pharaoh's greatest problem was that God had spoken, God had warned, God had displayed his power, even answered Pharaoh's own silly question. He answered it fully, but Pharaoh had an unwillingness to move, to change, to surrender. God had spoken, God had warned, God had demonstrated his power. He'd answered the prayers of Moses and Aaron. God had revealed himself, and still Pharaoh clung to his throne. I wonder if that's why this story has endured for thousands of years, not because that we wear crowns or are kings, but because every one of us has a throne or two that we are unwilling to leave. We are unwilling to give it up. Every one of us in this room has somewhere, at least one place, where we quietly say, I'll decide here. I'll rule this part of my life. I'll obey here if God has a way in his mercy of confronting us in those things. Sometimes gently and sometimes painfully. Not because he delights in destroying us or dismantling us, but because he loves us too much to allow ourselves to build our lives on things that cannot ultimately save us. What is your life built on today? The Pharaoh's question has been, who is this Lord that I should obey him? The question has been answered already in a way, and it's been answered in a way that has reverberated down throughout the century. This is who the Lord is. What will the Pharaoh do with this information? What will you do with what you know? Because all of the revelation that God gives us is meant to lead us to a response. We're going to end here today, and there's kind of a tension. We're kind of in between things, and that's just the way it's going to have to be. We have a lot more to get through when it comes to the plagues in the coming weeks, but feel that tension. And see yourself not in Moses' shoes, not trying to be a super Christian, but in Pharaoh's shoes. What is the throne that I need to get rid of? Where are the parts where I've withheld obedience to God because I'm going to do things my own way? God's revealing who he is.